What up, what up? I'm going to try to keep this under 5 minutes. The topic I want to discuss today that's on my mind is being an athlete with OCD or traumatic childhood or both. Because when you have OCD, I know for me, it manifested itself in my training and I didn't know it, but in the sense of it's I was just constantly hyper aware, and this could be OCD slash just fight or flight or just extreme hypervigilance from my fight or flight state that I grew up in, but I think a little OCD. It wasn't compulsive, but it was definitely an obsessive mindset. It just felt every little position in my body, right? Which can be such a huge asset in training because you're able to fix things quickly when someone gives you a cue because you are very aware of your body. And some of that is just athleticism. We don't want to label everything OCD, but there was the times where it was very much so a negative experience to me where I just feel every little thing that was wrong in my body. Right. And I remember when I started to rewire my brain without even knowing I was rewiring my brain at the time, because programs that I would do, like Awakened Athlete, and I didn't even know about neuroplasticity at the time, but I wanted to have my best year training. I was like, I might not continue training CrossFit after this. Let's just take training seriously, but in the sense of I already worked really hard every day in the gym. So I wanted to fix my mental, not being so negative in training, not be so anxious, not feeling like I needed to rush, not feeling every little wrong thing about every little position that's wrong and not perfect, right? So I started envisioning myself making a major competition every day on the treadmill when I warmed up, and I started using presence techniques in my training without, really, I mean, I knew what that was, but it wasn't I knew the science behind it or was thinking about the science behind it necessarily at the time, like I do now. But I started doing different techniques while I was squatting, mental techniques and talking to myself of different language and more positive language versus oh, this feels wrong while I squat, and then fixating in a good way, choosing different cues to think about so that I wouldn't be as focused on the wrong feelings, the imperfections of the movement. It's so wild to think back on. And I still have that today in training. I can, every time something's bad, it always feels off, right? It doesn't feel just right. I've been able to let go of that through a lot of that through this Awakened Athlete program and just continuing to use different sensory experiences in training. But anyway, so I started rewiring my brain in training without knowing it. And I was also doing a lot of diaphragmatic breathing, mobility at that time, which I think I have some videos on my channel. I use that with all my clients, and I use it with myself still. So with that, and I was constantly I was repeating mantras during my conditioning. I was doing a lot of nasal breathing at the time too, and just relaxing as well. And I think just that host of different variables led to a much more positive training experience. And what I wanted to talk about in telling you all of that is ultimately I brought myself a little more out of fight or flight, and between the nasal breathing, the diaphragmatic breathing stuff, focusing on different cues during training, visualizing a lot. I even use different hype speeches basically on Apple Music to get myself in the zone in training. So I probably was able to tap into flow state a lot during that year, and I actually qualified for a big competition after that. And much more importantly, I enjoyed the process much more, and I wasn't so fixated on everything that felt wrong in my body during training. I've always been able to focus on the good in training, in the sense of I never really felt like I have a bad training day, because it's just training. I'm always learning, I'm always growing, but I wasn't enjoying the experience as much because I wasn't in as much presence as I could be. And there were times when then that would just go crazy rampant, to an extreme. And looking back now, I can see okay, I was getting tired. Maybe I wasn't eating enough, sleeping enough. There was other stressors in my life. I was putting a hyper focus on performance in those times, and everything feeling perfect and needing to be perfect, that it was just again, now a bunch of variables that were causing collapse and a really burnt fight or flight state, and then a really burnt out state where I'd go quickly from like feeling buzzy all the time and very stressed out and fight or flight, very like I would say fight feeling. Not angry though, so maybe a little fight or flight, but then I would just burn out so quickly. I'd get really tired. I wouldn't be able to have any go in training. Like my muscles would feel terrible, my body would feel terrible, and my coach would be like, "Wait, what's going on with you?" So like I would push really hard for a long time, and then I would just all of a sudden like burn out. And I felt like this pattern existed in my life in general. Like every 6 months, I'm just burning the fuck out. Because I was just living off of adrenaline and stress hormones. So, anyways, I did that in training for that year. Training was a very pleasurable experience. I was also having like a really good time in my career, so that was helpful. Learning a lot, growing a lot, applying that to my training and my life, living in a great place, found new friends. So, again, lots of variables. But when it comes to athletes, I'd love to hear from athletes in the community, on this YouTube community with OCD, because I do think it's not surprising that a lot of people with mental health issues, how I feel about that term, end up being athletes, right? Because they have this pursuit of perfection. Also, moving the body obviously helps a lot with the mind and the rumination. So, even if they're not in their body as much as they'd like in training and in, present, it's still an opportunity to move that like anxious energy, that sympathetic energy through the body and discharge a lot of that. And, who doesn't love, like, I loved that tired feeling after training, that feeling of accomplishment, right? And when I really finally burnt out, so I'll go to that in a second, but so I think athletes are afraid to lose that. And I know I was, and I know I'm still in the midst of returning to like getting to a place where I'm not living in fight or flight. I'm not living off stress hormones. I'm not living off adrenaline. And I can find that go again in training. And I mean, CrossFit's a different fucking story with having to go all the time. But that has been a very long process. So I think it's very valid when athletes have a fear of like someone like a therapist or sports performance coach like taking away that negativity. I mean, I remember like watching a documentary and it was like, or some hearing like, certain football coaches they like to go to places where children have grown up in very tough environments because those guys have a lot of fucking go. And like they're going to do what they're told and they're going to get the job done. And that is, largely part of like living through various forms of trauma. So you don't want to just go to someone who's lived that way their whole life and be like, yeah, you'll be a better athlete if you are more in ventral vagal play state. By the way, that is where you get to flow state. So that's why this is very important. And that's why there's a lot more talk now of athletes being present, having fun in competitions so they can get to that state where they perform their best. But if you have someone as an athlete who's lived in fight or flight, who's operated off stress hormones, adrenaline, etc., and they've done that for so long, you're not just going to be like, yeah, let's just do all these neuroplasticity exercises if they're not really like primed and ready for that mentally, because that's also going to shift their state and potentially like release a lot of the emotions that they've had in their life that they really haven't expressed, and they've been using like movement of the body and athleticism to really sort of deal with those issues, for lack of a better word. So this is like a very delicate balance. And I worked with a mentor whom I loved. His name was Connor. He does sports like performance coaching, counseling, etc. And, we did discuss a lot. Like, imagine, like, this is when I had just found out I had OCD because I was so burnt out. So going back to what I was about to say before, like, I absolutely fucking collapsed. Like, when I had that severe OCD, it was a product of like overtraining while simultaneously overworking, while being super just fucking stressed about what I was going to do with my life, not being happy, like feeling like I just couldn't keep up my schedule anymore, just being so burnt out. But then realizing like my training in all my sports, I've been in fight or flight states, and then I would get really overwhelmed, and I remember I'd shut down. And now going back, there'd be always these periods in my sport where I'd just quit. But looking back, I can see like the shift in the nervous system state to just being like really down and really low and really hopeless, and not, wow, I'm like getting like a hit of like, wow, that's what happened to me when I was in track. Because when I was in high school, like all of a sudden I just like quit for a week. Like I didn't want to do it anymore. Like I had no go. And now I have a totally different frame of reference for those experiences. So Connor and I were like, wow, imagine like when you start getting to a place where that stress hormones and adrenaline and that stuff isn't driving you. And it's not to say you don't want to let that stuff drive you and your childhood drive you, but that it was like a primary thing of like me competing CrossFit. Like taking my power back from experiences in childhood. And I don't think that's something that you necessarily don't want to happen. Like, that was a part of my story for a reason. But it's like, imagine when you get to a more like flexible nervous system and you can let that shine through and that place guide you and that place lead you, and imagine how much better your training is going to feel when your body isn't constantly under threat. And again, I'm sort of in the midst of that now, and I'm like, oh god, like almost afraid to say it because it's been a couple years and I've had, good pockets and moments, but for the most part, like after that burnout and that collapse moment, it has not felt the same. It hasn't felt joyful, it hasn't felt playful, hasn't felt fun like it did during just those several months where I was doing all those things I mentioned before. Um, so it is a really, really challenging transition. And I think it's kind of like, I always look like Jordan, right? In the documentary, like you can see he's really motivated by that, like sort of aggression or like that harshness towards himself. And then you have someone that was like Kobe that was kind of led and being pulled by something. And I like to talk about that as like the switch. It's like the person that's dealing with a childhood trauma and like excelling in sports, operating off of that is like the getting pushed. And the person who's kind of looking inward and healing that stuff, maybe they actually decide like sports isn't for them. Like they go through that transition too. Like, oh, I was doing this when I identified with this and as a part of like that personal reality, that personality that I had before I healed. And it's also okay to do a lot of healing and realize like you don't want to do that shit anymore. And that was serving you in that part of your life and, in that just that part of the life and where you were at that consciousness then. And it's like, okay, you're in a different level of consciousness now and you've done a lot of healing and now maybe you're being pulled. Like it's like there's a different reason why you do what you do, because you've had that healing and that neuroplasticity, the healing inward, the soul, the mind, and the body. So I see that as sort of like when people kind of maintain their training or their sport through that and find more flexibility in the nervous system, like now it's like a pull, or maybe there's just their sport, they're freer as Connor would say in their sport because like they're also not identified with the sport anymore. They're not operating all these under these stress hormones anymore, fight or flight, and now they have other experiences in their life, other hobbies, loving relationships that they've been able to develop through healing. So now there's less pressure on them in their sport because at the end of the day they feel very fulfilled and satisfied in the life that they have outside of just trying to be the best that they can be at their sport. So what I also again want to say is like it's not an easy transition. It's very weird. It's very murky. It's a little back and forth, like, and I just kind of hung out in my sport, if you will, because I needed to move. Like there's no way I had to actually stop training CrossFit and started running, and my therapist from the OCD Institute was like, girl, you've worked out way more than this every day for the last several years, like multiple years. Like you need to get in the gym again and you need to start moving. She was like, normally I wouldn't say that to people, like to work out as much as you do, but like that was my norm. That was my baseline. So losing that also contributed a lot to the severe OCD, I'm sure, experience, right? And, it detracts from when you're having severe OCD. It's like I wasn't having a good time in the gym because I was being flooded with thoughts while I was training. And I'm like, the one thing I fucking love, bro. Like, can you not? So, yeah, it's like, it's a very interesting experience. But I think, I am starting to find some joy in it again, which is nice. But that also was a lot of steps backward and doing things a lot differently and hiring someone where I got on a call and was like, bro, I have OCD. My nervous system is wild. Like, I want to be driving this car with you as well. Like, I don't want to be just being told what to do. Like, I want you to take my feedback. And when I say my body is hitting the limit and I'm in this fight or flight state, or if I'm experiencing, a deeper or more severe spell of OCD, like this needs to be taken into account in my training, and we need to fluctuate training. And like for the most part, I haven't, but I've also listened to my body more and not forced myself into the ground as much as I did in the past. Obviously, there's a balance when you're an athlete and you're pursuing, high level athleticism, but I also took a step back for that. I was like, we're not going to pursue that right now. We're not going to compete. Like, we're just going to get stronger. We're just going to get healthy, mind, body, and spirit. And of course, there's something inside of me that's always like, we want to be the best we can be. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I think that's just an interesting experience with athletes and OCD. And I'm very curious to hear from athletes with OCD. I would love that. And also if you're afraid, like if you're afraid that like taming the beast is going to make you lose your edge, because that is a totally like valid fear to have. And the experience of like going into that cave of I'm going to lose my edge if I tame this stuff has not been easy. Like, I would never lie to anyone about that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, you got to approach and you got to have supports in place. You got to have therapists. You got to have mentors. You got to have the right coach by your side. Because even if they don't understand or know what OCD is, like the right person is going to make all the difference in, how you heal. So, yeah, super fascinating topic. And I think I'm like very interested in working with athletes at some point as a therapist in sports performance, because like working with my mentor, Connor, like a lot of sports performance isn't about like the actual sport and doing it and, all that stuff. It's about the past of the athlete, the traumas they carry with them, the experiences they carry with them, the neuroplasticity, the wired in patterns that they have in their subconscious and so forth. So, and if they have, maybe even a bigger purpose, like that's something that I'm exploring now. I think a lot of successful athletes, that's why you hear them talk about God and like faith and everything like that. So more to be said on this topic. I'm super interested in it. And yeah, would love to hear from people that identify as athletes and have OCD. Thanks, guys.